Hello, everybody. It is July 22nd, 2024, and welcome to the first Purgatory Ironworks SteelCast. You know, and about halfway through me saying that, I had to go check and make sure that Alex Steele hadn't nabbed that particular nomenclature, and he didn't, so, you know, he can pound sand. It's mine now. Folks, I want to tell you how much I appreciate you being here with me. And as we seek to reinvigorate our YouTube channel, I wanted to have something where I could talk a little bit more and not have to worry about setting up the cameras and all that kind of good stuff. I wanted to keep it tight, concise. I don't want it to be rambling. So I wanted to give you guys some useful information, especially if you're looking to get into the craft, or even more so, because the business advice of doing this work translates to other artists in things. If you're a woodworker, if you're a leather worker, if you're in the hobby / craft / artist world, this all applies. And that's what this particular SteelCast is for. So hopefully we're going to be do at least one of these a week, and I'm going to try to keep it as nice, packaged, and concise as possible. So let's start off. The first thing is, whenever you're talking about something, you've got to define some terms. And if I'm going to talk to you about the business of blacksmithing, first of all, I've got to define business. And that's more of a problem than you would think. And this is where we've got to have a couple of different categories. So the first big separation that we can have is what is a hobby and what is a business. So here's the deal. If you spend the majority of your week working in blacksmithing or blacksmithing related stuff, that's fair to call that a business. A better metric is, do you make over $20,000 a year doing your blacksmith work? So between those two things, that's going to tell you whether you have a business or you have a hobby. And it's very important to know the difference between the two of those things, because there's different rules for each. Here's what I mean. So if you're doing any of this work as a hobby, that means that you really don't care about the money. Now, of course, everybody wants to make that extra $200 at the show. But what I mean by that is, if you don't sell anything, or if you sell anything at all, it's not that big of a deal. That's a hobby. It's usually something you spend money on so that you can enjoy it. It's not much different than having the opportunity to spend $100, go have a nice meal, and go to the movies. Okay, that's a hobby. That realm is completely separate from the business side of it. And you've got to make a hard point, because when you're talking to people, everybody is going to have advice for you. But the problem is, the advice that works for a hobby is rarely the advice that works for a business. So we've got to make that distinction, separation. And I would urge you that when you go to an event, that in your mind, that you make that distinction, because everybody's going to give you advice, but you need to say, is this person giving me hobby advice, or are they giving me business advice? And do they know the difference? All right, that's number one. So the second thing the next topic I want to cover are the three biggest mistakes that somebody new is going to make when they're thinking that they're going to go into business. All right, there's a couple things. So the first one is really more toward artists and the artist mentality. Now, don't worry. Future podcasts here are going to just absolutely hammer my art brethren. So this is just a getting to know you love tap. Okay. The first mistake you're going to make when thinking about going into blacksmithing for business is the mistake of trying to bend the world to your will. Because in my mind, when I got started, I had this picture of what blacksmithing was supposed to be, right? And what I didn't realize is that it was this hybrid of the quintessential artist, that what was supposed to happen, I was supposed to go into the forge, I was supposed to make this incredibly unique $5,000 piece that week and sell it, and that's just how it was. That every week I was making a masterpiece, and then the money just happened. Okay, that's stupid. That's not how it works. Unfortunately, so many of the artists that are out there, especially young artists, they see these master craftsmen come up with this piece, and it's super high profile. And that's usually all they see. They don't see the incredible bulk of work that they're doing week to week that actually pays for that incredibly high-end piece that you're most likely not going to sell. So here's the first piece of advice. Make sure that you are understanding what the world actually is and not what you want it to be according to how you want to be an artist. You, even if you are special, even if you have talent, you are going to have to play within the rules of the world. Now there's that's kind of broad and kind of vague, but get it out of your head that you're going to reinvent the wheel. You're special, just not that special. You're going to have to find somebody that's doing what you want to do and kind of copy that. Okay? Second thing, and this is something called the festival effect. Now, if you guys, especially you guys that are probably getting around retirement age, man, this is the pitfall for the old guys. All right? So here's the thing. You go to a local festival. It's a beautiful day. You got the family. And you see a guy that's got an entire spread of blacksmithing stuff. He's got all his trinkets. He's got his S-hooks. He's got his candle holders. And you're like, man, I watched Forged in Fire and I want to do this. Now, that's perfectly fine. That's how you get into a hobby. But then there's a real hook in there because you're like, okay, and I can make money at this because look at this guy. Man, he's got 4 tables of stuff. He's got a kilt and he kind of smells funny, but that's okay. He's got 4 tables of stuff. And so clearly he's got to be successful at this, right? And so that's in your head the whole day. You go back home, and when you get home, you say, okay, man, that's what I'm going to do because clearly it can be done. So here's the problem. Well, let me finish this story out. All right. So you've decided you're going to do it. So the next week you're going to spend just a ton of money. You're going to get all your equipment. You're going to get all your stuff. And so you spend 2 months just hemorrhaging money so that you can have your spread. And you find you a local festival and you go set up at the local festival. Well, now you're the stinky guy in the kilt, right? So you're back to that place where you were originally watching somebody else. I'm sorry, guys. There's a devastating cat fight going on the desk right now. All right, cats, y'all got to go. You are killing me. Good Lord. Sorry about that. Interrupted the entire flow of the story. All right, so now you're the stinky guy in the kilt, okay? And you're back to that same point that somebody else comes up and they see your spread and they're like, wow, this guy is really doing it. He's successful. It's what I want to do. But here's the problem. What you never got to see and what that guy is not going to be able to see is what happened to you as the stinky guy in the kilt after the show. And the question is, how did you do? How did you do after the show? And the answer is often, I completely lost my ass. What's happened is there's this repeating cycle. I've seen this happen across several different trades. I've seen this happen with woodworkers. I've especially seen it happen with people that make turkey calls. Oh my God, if the stories I could tell you there. Because the real proof of the pudding is after the show. Anybody can spend a horrendous amount of money, buy their place at the show, make a lot of stock, but that in no way tells you if these folks are breaking even or even doing well at all. I mean, it does not tell you, okay? So that's the festival effect. And I fell prey to this early on because I see a guy that's got this beautiful spread. Ed Jackson was a gentleman that was just north of me in Shelburne, Georgia. Mr. Ed, now he actually had a really cool setup. He actually would sharpen knives at our local, turnip festivals, and he'd sell little pocket knives. He had a Bader B3, he had a Bader B2 that he had set up on a portable deal, and he'd sit there and sharpen knives and take money. And I'm like, wow, this guy's got the truck, he's got the trailer. Man, he's clearly very successful with this. But that simply wasn't the case in reality. Even I saw a couple of blacksmiths early on that I'm like, man, these guys are really doing it. In fact, I was at a place called Cheehaw Park, and I saw a guy that had just beautiful rendezvous era axes and a bunch of other stuff. I'm like, man, this is what I want to do. So here comes to our third problem, and that's the festival effect. But this leads directly into the last and the third mistake of what we're going to call the trust fund and retirement trap. Okay, so let me go back to these guys that I told you about that I saw at these shows. The one thing that I failed to notice is that these guys all had very gray beards. That these guys were all older and they were all retired. Okay? Now, for a lot of us, especially you young kids out there, you don't know what that means. What that means is that they don't have a money problem. If they are retired, there's a good chance they have a check coming in every month, no matter what they do. So what you're seeing on the table is their play money. That is their money for burning. And some of them have more money to burn than others. So you're seeing this incredibly nice spread. But you don't understand that it doesn't matter if that entire spread is set on fire and left at the festival. It doesn't matter. They're not there for the money. This is just part of the fun that they are having. And the danger in that is that a young person who's aggressively seeking to go into business sees this and they're like, well, clearly the business is working, and it's not a business. It is a hobby, and it is pretty much guaranteed to lose money. That's a heck of a trap. I fell into that. 5 or 6 people I know fell into that because you're going, I'm seeing the evidence that this works, and it's simply, well, it does work as long as you got a couple million in the bank, you get a check every week, or a very wealthy spouse. I think it was Bob Lovelace that, and if you don't know who that is, Bob Lovelace is a legendary knife maker, and he was at an event, and I'm pretty sure it was Bob Lovelace, and somebody, a young guy, asked a question, said, Mr. Bob, how do you make a living at making knives? And he kind of laughed and he looked over to a lady seated next to the podium and he says, marry rich. And that's the answer for so many folks that are in the particular craft on that end, is that they're hobbyists and their money is coming from somewhere else. Very important note. Second thing, and this happens on the younger end of the spectrum, and I'm going to tell you this story. So I was in college. I'm not going to mention any names, but there was a very talented artist, and he was very good. I was exceedingly. I'm a vain person, and I'm going to tell you, as much as I love seeing beautiful work, you have no idea how cross-eyed jealous I am of people who are better than me, and there's a lot of them out there, right? So, but this guy was very good, very talented. He graduated, and he went off to a big city and he opened a studio. And man, for like 5 years, he had this studio in this major metropolitan area. And it drove me nuts. I lost sleep because I was sucking hind tit when it came to my artist career. I was in Andersonville. I was here and there. I was going to shows and festivals. I mean, I was in it, and man, every inch of ground came at a gallon of blood, right? And here's this guy that just goes into a major town with all these rents and all these expenses and is doing well. He's teaching classes and he's holding art shows. And I'm like, what in God's name am I doing wrong? How am I screwing up this bad? I mean, the guy was good, but he wasn't phenomenal. He didn't seem he had a great sense of business. But here he is clearly beating the absolute pants off of me in our life competition. And I could not figure it out. And it drove me just bonkers. I was so angry. I was so jealous. I was like, what am I not getting? And it just became the eventuality that I just clearly either I just suck so bad and I just didn't have it, but I was keeping on doing it. Now I tell you that story because years later, let me tell you what was actually happening. is that this young man, who was very good at what he did, had some very wealthy friends, like ultra mega money buddies, and he had 2 of them. And they decided to bankroll this little endeavor. So they had their own, essentially, little art setup that was being financed by trust funds. So after several years, they got tired of spending their money, and it just went away, could not survive on its own. The moment the trust fund money stopped rolling in, it failed. So you've got to understand, for years, the angst that this caused me, because I was getting, the impression is that somebody was just doing great and they just had it, when at the end of the day, it was just trust fund art kids. This happens more often than you would think. When you see, and I'm not pointing any fingers, because we even have that happening in the blacksmith community. So if you see somebody that just suddenly busts out on the scene and they've got super into camera equipment, super nice power hammers, new shop on that end of it, well, I could have $1 million business too if I had $2 million to spend, right? So be careful of that. If you're going into business, remember that the name of the game is survival, and make sure and talk to people that are actually surviving. Ask them how they're doing it, and be aware that there is no magic pill. At the end of the day, there is just business, 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 business. And if something doesn't smell right, well, you're probably missing something. I always chuckle. If you go into the bad part of town, you almost always will find a business somewhere that shouldn't exist, like that does very well in one of the most economically destitute areas of town. You will find a business that on paper is doing incredibly well. Why? Because that's how people launder money. It's not that the business works, it's that it's serving a different function than what you thought it was doing, right? The same thing occurs with blacksmithing. The same thing occurs with artists of all stripes. If you're going to be in business, you've got to ask the right questions. You have got to get behind the curtain. You cannot take success on its face value, because it may not be real success. It may just be a candy coating on something that would otherwise fail on its own. I've seen this several times in my own work. I've seen this across the spectrum. So if you're looking to get into the business, you're going to have to figure out how to be able to discern the truth of business, which, by the way, has nothing to do specifically with blacksmithing. One of the things I've always said is that our art students have been cheated in college because they are being filched for their educational money, but they're never being taught how to really survive. The first class that they should give you when you step into art college is business. You should know how to make money before you ever set foot in your first underwater basket weaving class. Flat out and period. And I have seen so many talented weirdos just get plowed under because they don't understand the business, or don't know how to find the people with the knowledge that know the business. They don't understand how to pair themselves, because sometimes you need help. If you're not good at business, find somebody who is. If you suck at the numbers, marry somebody that's good at the numbers. That's how that works, because the numbers make it all happen. I would have never been able to do what I've done here as a blacksmith, as a TV guy, or YouTube if I did not pay attention to the numbers. Now, if you want to be a hobbyist and you want to debate the finer points of crappy MIG welds, fine. But nobody can have that conversation unless they are properly financed. And that, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, is going to be our first episode of the SteelCast here at Purgatory Ironworks. Thank you all for coming by, and I hope you'll join us again next week. Take care, folks. Oh, by the way, I was supposed to do the crappy YouTube thing. If you have comments, I'd love to hear what you got to say. Isn't that what you're supposed to do? Like, subscribe, the freaking deal. So, Be safe, guys. Talk to you.